My name is Rory Houlihan. I ran for U.S. Senate last spring, 2016, to stop the ticking time bomb so I could put our economy on track for a bright new day instead of all things ending. I lost and I'm not running, but the ticking time bombs are still here, if not more so. Let me educate you on the ticking time bombs and give you the rest of the story. 15C Part 2, How States' Rights was financed on the backs of farmers. Back on track. The crop rotation system promoted general farming practices. So during a recession, farmers had the means to be self-sufficient and feed their families, even when the cash crop and the cash wasn't coming in from the cash crop. But Roy L. Butts changed all this. Roy L. Butts thought that paying farmers not to overproduce was stupid. With the world's population increasing, there was no need and reason to limit production. He wanted farmers to produce as much as possible, and he totally changed our agricultural system from the crop rotation model to the ELP, always lower prices, always lower margins, to do more and more for less and less. I would call that the rat race. Farmers were rewarded only for producing more and more. That promoted overproduction that drove down crop and agricultural prices. Great for hiding the state tax increases. Soon the price of farm production wasn't large enough to cover input costs, and more family farms were put out of business, forcing more and more farmers and their families off their farms. Before Roy L. Butts, the average size of the farms in the United States was 160 acres, the family farm. Today, the average farm is over 1,000 acres, the corporate farm. With the size of the farm, can young kids starting off afford to buy? Nah, they can afford to buy that 160 acre farm, but that 1,000 acre farm is a little bit too expensive. The average age of our farmers today is 60 years old. Only corporations today can buy these mega farms. Even with the death tax as high as it is, most young folks just can't afford. As more and more farmers are pushed off their land, rural towns soon became ghost towns, and towns only filled with grays and grannies and goings. Their children long left to big cities. Recession soon was more devastating in rural communities because farmers were now solely dependent on their cash crop. During the 1980s recession, farmers were caught between a rock and a hard place. During the 1970s, they had to buy big, expensive equipment to expand their production capabilities. Now they were strapped with high loans and high interest rates, but the crops prices tanked. So they were unable to pay. Lands that were in families for generations lost. The excuse was market forces. But in actuality, it was a failed conservative ELP policy put in by Roy L. Butts. Before Roy L. Butts, bankers and suppliers all faced dependable prices for their crops. After Roy L. Butts, prices were all over, and mostly all under. Before Roy L. Butts, the rural farm production of the GDP was 32%. In 2010, the rural portion was 10%. That is 90% of those living on 90% of the land mass in the United States received only 10% of the GDP. In 2016, it was estimated to be just 8%. Rural communities have lost 22% of their U.S. GDP or buying power over the last 40 years. If we look at the growth of state income and the loss of rural GDP, rural GDP this way, state income that way. They are mirror images of each other over this same 40-year period, which have led me to conclude that states' rights have been born on the backs of our farmers and our rural communities. We have to thank conservative states' rights policies for a concentration of wealth and population in mostly the big cities and their suburbs. Why Democrats haven't made a fuss? Big cities vote for Democrats. Remember, I talked briefly about what would happen to the US if a nuclear attack would occur. If the US had a nuclear attack, that this increase of concentration of both population, communications, and manufacturing means that our country's destruction would be close to 90% and most likely more. Oh, by the way, this is what a PDB, not a PBD, presidential daily briefing looks like. A president can ask for the supporting raw data to be included, but a PDB is action going on, conclusion, and sometimes recommended counteractions with pros and cons. I understand that one of my papers did become part of a PDB, a daily brief. Folks, there is over 40 years of data here from a number of sources like government agencies, private sources like the Wall Street Journal and Barron's, and I am 90% certain of my conclusions. You have a good and blessed day. Bye. If I can find the thing. There we go.